The wind howled like a wild animal across the frozen Dakota plains. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. It was February 1887, and this was the kind of storm that killed people. 8 children stumbled through the white darkness, their thin clothes no match for the bitter cold. The oldest girl, 14-year-old Skybird, wrapped her arms around the smallest boy, who was only 6. His lips had turned blue, and his small body shook like a leaf in the wind. "Stay close," Skybird called out in Lakota, her voice barely heard over the screaming wind. "We must find shelter." The children had been traveling with their families when the government soldiers came. The soldiers said all native families had to move to a new place, far from their homeland. During the chaos of leaving, these 8 children got separated from their parents. Now they were lost in the worst blizzard anyone could remember. Little Running Wolf, the youngest, could barely walk anymore. His older brother, Nighthorse, picked him up and carried him. The 8-year-old boy named Thundercloud was coughing badly. The twins, Morningstar and Evening Star, held hands so they wouldn't lose each other. Gentle Rain, a quiet 10-year-old girl, helped the others stay together, and 12-year-old Black Wolf tried to be brave, even though he was scared too. They had been walking for hours. Their feet were numb with cold. Ice formed on their eyelashes. The little ones were crying, but their tears froze on their cheeks. "I can't feel my toes," whispered Thundercloud between coughs. "We're going to die out here," said Black Wolf, trying not to let the younger ones hear him. Skybird looked around desperately. Through the swirling snow, she thought she saw something. A dark shape in the distance. Maybe a building. "There." She pointed. "Something's there." They stumbled toward the shape, falling in the deep snow, helping each other up. As they got closer, they could see it was a cabin made of logs. Smoke came from the chimney, which meant someone was inside. A warm glow came from the windows. Skybird's heart pounded. She knew that white people didn't always help native children. Some were kind, but others were cruel. Still, they had no choice. The children would freeze to death if they stayed outside. She knocked on the wooden door with her frozen fist. No answer. She knocked harder. Inside the cabin, a man sat alone by his fireplace. His name was Stone Ridge, and he had lived by himself on this mountain ranch for 3 years. He was 42 years old, tall and strong, with rough hands from working the land. His face had lines from too much sadness and not enough smiling. Stone Ridge heard the knocking and frowned. Nobody ever came to his cabin, especially not in a storm like this. He thought maybe it was just the wind blowing something against his door, but the knocking came again, weaker this time. He got up slowly and walked to the door. When he opened it, he couldn't believe what he saw. 8 native children stood in his doorway, covered in snow and ice. They were shivering so hard they could barely stand. The oldest girl looked up at him with desperate eyes. In broken English, she said words that would stay with him forever. "We're freezing, sir." Behind her, the other children were crying softly. The smallest boy had collapsed in the snow. One of the girls was trying to wake up a boy who had fallen, asleep standing up, a dangerous sign in this cold. Stone Ridge stared at them for a long moment. His first thought was to close the door. Getting involved with native children could bring trouble from the government. The authorities didn't like it when white people helped native families. But then he looked at their faces. These weren't dangerous people. They were just children, cold and scared and far from home. The little boy in the snow wasn't moving. Something inside Stone Ridge's frozen heart cracked open. Maybe it was because he remembered losing his own family. Maybe it was because no child should suffer like this. Without thinking about the consequences, he whispered, "Then you're mine now." He stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. "Get inside, quickly." The children stumbled into the warm cabin. Skybird carried Little Running Wolf, who was barely conscious. The others followed, leaving puddles of melted snow on the wooden floor. Stone Ridge's cabin wasn't large, but it was warm and dry. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Oil lamps gave off a golden light. It felt like heaven after the freezing storm outside. "Sit by the fire," Stone Ridge said, pointing to the fireplace. He spoke slowly so they could understand his English. The children gathered around the flames, still shivering. Stone Ridge looked at them and realized he had no idea what to do next. He had been living alone for so long, he'd forgotten how to take care of anyone else. But he had to try. He went to his bedroom and pulled out every blanket he owned. He wrapped the children in the warm wool, starting with the smallest ones. Little Running Wolf was so cold he couldn't stop shaking, even wrapped in 2 blankets. Stone Ridge heated water on his stove and made warm broth from dried meat. He gave each child a cup of the hot liquid. They drank it gratefully, holding the warm cups against their frozen hands. Thundercloud was coughing worse now. His breathing sounded rough and raspy. Stone Ridge had heard that sound before. The boy was getting sick from the cold and wet. "What are your names?" Stone Ridge asked Skybird, since she seemed to be the leader. She pointed to herself. Skybird. Then she pointed to the others and said their names in English as best she could. Nighthorse, Thundercloud, Morning Star, Evening Star, Gentle, Rain, Black Wolf, Running Wolf. Stone Ridge nodded. "I'm Stone Ridge." Skybird looked confused by his name, but she repeated it carefully. As the children warmed up, Stone Ridge could see them better. They were thin, too thin. Their clothes were worn and patched. They looked like they hadn't eaten a good meal in days. He went to his kitchen and found bread, dried meat, and canned peaches. It wasn't much, but it was food. The children ate like they were starving, which they probably were. Outside, the storm got worse. The wind shook the cabin walls. Snow piled up against the windows. Stone Ridge realized that even if he wanted to take the children somewhere else, it was impossible. The storm would last for days. As the evening went on, the children began to relax a little. The warmth and food helped them feel safer. But Thundercloud was getting sicker. His forehead was hot with fever, and his cough was getting deeper. Stone Ridge didn't know much about healing, but he knew the boy needed help. He made a bed for Thundercloud close to the fire, using his own thick quilts. He gave the boy more warm broth and tried to keep him comfortable. The other children watched everything Stone Ridge did. They didn't know if they could trust this white man. In their short lives, they had learned that white people could be dangerous, but Stone Ridge was being kind to them, and they were grateful for the warmth and safety. Skybird helped take care of the younger children. She braided Gentle Rain's long hair and made sure the twins stayed warm. She sang quiet Lakota songs to help them feel less scared. Stone Ridge listened to her singing. He didn't understand the words, but the melody was beautiful and sad. It reminded him of his own losses, his own loneliness. As night fell, Stone Ridge realized he had to figure out sleeping arrangements. His cabin only had 1 bedroom where he slept. There was the main room with the fireplace and a small kitchen. He gave the children his bedroom. All 8 of them crowded together on his big bed and on blankets on the floor. They were used to sleeping close together for warmth and comfort. Stone Ridge made himself a bed by the fireplace. He lay awake most of the night listening to the storm and wondering what he had gotten himself into. Thundercloud's cough kept everyone awake. The boy was burning with fever now. Stone Ridge got up several times to check on him, bringing cool water to try to lower his temperature. By morning, the storm was still raging. Snow had drifted up to the windows. Stone Ridge couldn't even see his barn, which was only 50 feet away. The children woke up hungry and scared. They didn't know what would happen to them. Would this strange white man keep helping them? Would he turn them over to the soldiers? Stone Ridge made breakfast, cornmeal mush and bacon. The children ate gratefully, even though they weren't used to white people's food. Thundercloud was too sick to eat much. His breathing was shallow and fast. Stone Ridge knew the boy might die if his fever didn't break soon. He spent the day trying to help Thundercloud get better. He made steam for the boy to breathe by boiling water with pine needles. He kept him warm and gave him small sips of broth. The other children tried to help however they could. Skybird translated when Stone Ridge needed to communicate with the sick boy. Nighthorse kept the fire going. The twins entertained Running Wolf with finger games. As the second day passed, Stone Ridge realized something surprising. He wasn't angry about having these children in his home. For 3 years his cabin had been silent and sad. Now it was full of young voices, even though they spoke a language he didn't understand. The children were polite and tried not to be any trouble. They helped with small chores without being asked. They shared everything equally and took care of each other. But Stone Ridge also knew that this situation couldn't last forever. Somewhere out there, government agents were probably looking for these lost children. When the storm ended, people would come asking questions. The storm raged for 5 more days. Snow piled so high around Stone Ridge's cabin that the windows looked like they were underwater in a white ocean. The wind never stopped howling, and the cold was so fierce that ice formed on the inside walls of the cabin. But inside, something beautiful was happening. Thundercloud's fever broke on the 3rd day. Stone Ridge had stayed awake all night, putting cool cloths on the boy's forehead and making sure he kept breathing. When the 8-year-old finally opened his eyes and asked for water in a weak voice, Stone Ridge felt a relief so strong it surprised him. "He's better," Skybird said in her careful English, smiling for the first time since they'd arrived. Stone Ridge just nodded, but inside his chest, something warm was growing. With Thundercloud getting stronger, the cabin became livelier. The children had been quiet and scared at first, but now they began to show their real personalities. Nighthorse, who was 12, was serious and responsible like his sister Skybird. He always made sure the younger children were safe and warm. He helped Stone Ridge carry wood for the fire and tried to learn English words by pointing at things and repeating what Stone Ridge said. The twins, Morning Star and Evening Star, were 9 years old and full of mischief. They looked so much alike that Stone Ridge couldn't tell them apart for the first few days. They played games with stones and sticks, giggling quietly so they wouldn't bother the adults. When they thought no one was watching, they would sneak extra pieces of bread or dried fruit. Black Wolf was 11 and wanted to prove he was almost a man. He tried to help with the hardest chores and never complained about anything. But sometimes, Stone Ridge caught him staring out the window with sad eyes, probably thinking about his family. Gentle Rain was 10 and lived up to her name. She moved quietly around the cabin, helping without being asked. She was especially good with little Running Wolf, singing him soft songs when he missed his parents. And Running Wolf, the youngest at only 6, was everyone's favorite. He had big dark eyes and a sweet smile. He followed Stone Ridge around like a puppy, even though they couldn't talk to each other very well. Stone Ridge found himself learning their names and personalities. For 3 years he had lived in silence, talking only to his horses and cattle. Now his cabin was full of voices, young, bright voices that made the dark winter days seem less lonely. Communication was hard at first. The children knew only a few English words, and Stone Ridge knew no Lakota at all. But necessity is a great teacher. They began to understand each other through pointing, drawing, and acting things out. Skybird was the best at English, so she became the translator. She was smart and picked up new words quickly. Stone Ridge found himself teaching her more English, and she began teaching him simple Lakota words. "Fire," he would say, pointing to the fireplace. "Pita," she would reply, teaching him the Lakota word. "Water," "Money," "Snow," "Wa." The other children giggled when Stone Ridge tried to pronounce their words. His tongue wasn't used to the sounds of their language, and he often got them wrong. But they were patient with him, just as he was patient with their English. On the 4th day of the storm, something happened that changed everything. Thundercloud, who was much better but still weak, had been sleeping by the fire. In the middle of the night, he started coughing again. Not the terrible sick cough from before, but a normal cough that woke him up. He was confused and scared, waking up in a strange place. In his sleepy state, he forgot where he was and called out for his mother and Lakota. Stone Ridge woke up immediately. He saw the little boy sitting up, frightened and crying. Without thinking, Stone Ridge went to him and put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe." Thundercloud looked up at this big white man with tears in his eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the kindness in Stone Ridge's voice. Without hesitation, The little boy reached up and hugged Stone Ridge around the neck. Stone Ridge went very still. It had been so long since anyone had hugged him, so long since anyone had needed his comfort. The boy's small arms around his neck felt like a miracle. From that moment, everything was different. The next morning, Thundercloud stayed close to Stone Ridge. When Stone Ridge went to tend the fire, Thundercloud followed. When Stone Ridge cooked breakfast, the boy stood next to him watching everything he did. "He likes you," Skybird told Stone Ridge with a small smile. Stone Ridge felt his frozen heart crack open a little more. As the days passed, all the children began to trust him more. They saw how gentle he was with Thundercloud, how he made sure everyone had enough food, how he gave up his own comfort to keep them warm. Stone Ridge found himself changing too. For 3 years, he had been angry at the world. Angry about losing his wife and baby son to sickness, angry about being alone, angry about life being unfair. But it was hard to stay angry when Running Wolf brought him pretty stones he found by the fireplace. Hard to be bitter when Morning Star and Evening Star made him laugh with their silly games. Hard to feel sorry for himself when he saw how brave these children were, even though they had lost everything. The children had their own ways of dealing with sadness. In the evenings, they would sit in a circle, and Skybird would tell old stories in Lakota. Stone Ridge couldn't understand the words, but he could tell they were important stories about their people, their history, their beliefs. Sometimes they would sing together, their voices blended in beautiful harmony, filling the cabin with music Stone Ridge had never heard before. The songs were sometimes happy, sometimes sad, but always beautiful. Stone Ridge began to look forward to these evening times. He would sit nearby pretending to mend clothes or whittle wood, but really just listening to their voices and watching their faces in the firelight. One evening, Skybird noticed him listening. "You like our songs?" she asked. Stone Ridge nodded. "They're beautiful." She smiled and said something to the others in Lakota. Then she looked back at Stone Ridge. "We sing for you too now," she said. "You give us home. We give you music." Stone Ridge felt something tight in his chest loosen. A home. That's what his cabin had become. The children also had practical skills that impressed Stone Ridge. Nighthorse was good at fixing things. When the handle broke on Stone Ridge's favorite coffee pot, the 12-year-old boy carved a new one from a piece of wood, fitting it perfectly. Skybird was an excellent cook, even with the limited supplies in Stone Ridge's kitchen. She showed him how to make corn cakes that were much better than his usual hard biscuits. She also knew which wild plants were good for medicine, information that might be useful when the storm ended. Black Wolf was strong for his age and eager to help with heavy work. He and Stone Ridge worked together to bring in extra firewood from the shed, trudging through snow up to their waists. The twins were creative and clever. They made toys for Running Wolf out of scraps of cloth and wood. They also seemed to have a talent for making everyone laugh, even during the darkest moments. Gentle Rain had a gift for taking care of others. She helped Thundercloud get stronger by making sure he ate enough and rested when he needed to. She also had a way of sensing when someone was sad and would quietly sit with them until they felt better. Even little Running Wolf contributed. His innocent joy and trust reminded everyone that there was still goodness in the world. When he clapped his hands at simple things like seeing a bird outside the window, it made all the older children smile. Stone Ridge found himself thinking less about his own grief and more about these 8 young lives. They needed food, warmth, safety, things he could provide. It felt good to be needed again. But he also knew their situation was complicated. These children weren't orphans, somewhere out there. Their families were probably looking for them, worried sick about what had happened. When the storm ended, Stone Ridge would have to figure out how to reunite them with their loved ones. There was also the matter of the government, agents. Stone Ridge knew that Native children were often taken from their families and sent to special schools far away. These schools were supposed to civilize Native children by making them forget their own culture and language. The thought of these bright, beautiful children being forced to forget their songs and stories made Stone Ridge angry. But he was just one man. What could he do against the government? On the 7th day, the wind finally stopped howling. The snow was still falling, but gently now, like a soft white blanket instead of sharp ice needles. Stone Ridge looked out his window and realized the worst of the storm was over. Soon he would be able to dig out from the snow. Soon the world would return to normal. But what was normal now? These 8 children had become part of his life. His cabin felt like a real home for the first time in years. The thought of going back to his old lonely existence made him feel sick. That evening, as the children sang their beautiful songs by the fireplace, Stone Ridge made a decision that would change all their lives. He was going to fight to keep them safe, no matter what. It cost him. The morning sun shone bright on the fresh snow, making everything sparkle like diamonds. After 7 days trapped inside, Stone Ridge could finally open his door without a wall of snow falling into his cabin. The silence was almost strange after so many days of howling wind. The children pressed against the windows, amazed by how much snow had fallen. It reached the roof of Stone Ridge's barn and covered his fence posts completely. "So much white," whispered Gentle Rain in English, one of the new phrases she had learned. Stone Ridge began the hard work of digging out. The children helped as much as they could, though the snow was often deeper than they were tall. Running Wolf tried to help, but mostly just played, throwing snowballs at his older siblings and laughing when they pretended to be hit. As they worked, Stone Ridge's mind was busy with worries. He kept looking down the mountain trail, expecting to see riders coming. Government agents would be searching for the lost children. Their families would be looking too, desperate for news. But part of him, a part that grew stronger each day, didn't want anyone to find them. These children had brought life back to his world. For 3 years after losing his wife and son, Stone Ridge had been like a walking dead man. He got up each day, did his chores, ate his meals, and went to bed, but he wasn't really living. Now his cabin was full of laughter and songs and the kinds of problems that made life interesting. Thundercloud following him around asking questions, in broken English. The twins getting into harmless mischief. Skybird teaching him new words while she helped cook dinner. It was the family he thought he'd never have again. But these weren't his children. They belonged to families who loved them and were probably sick with worry. Stone Ridge knew he couldn't keep them just because he had grown attached to them. Still, the thought of what might happen to them made his stomach tight with fear. On the 2nd day after the storm, Skybird came to him with serious eyes. "Stone Ridge," she said carefully, "what happens to us now?" He had been dreading this question. Skybird was smart. She understood their situation better than the younger children did. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "The government men will come looking for you. Your families too." Skybird nodded sadly. "Government men take children to school. Bad school. Make us forget who we are." Stone Ridge had heard about these boarding schools. They cut the children's hair, made them wear white people's clothes, and punished them for speaking their own language. The schools said they were helping native children, but Stone Ridge thought it sounded more like stealing their souls. "Maybe your family's found a safe place," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Maybe," Skybird said, but her voice was full of doubt. "Maybe they think we are dead." That night, Stone Ridge lay awake thinking. The children were sleeping peacefully in his bedroom. Even Thundercloud was breathing easily now. But Stone Ridge couldn't rest. He thought about his options. He could take the children to the nearest town and turn them over to the authorities. That was probably what the law said he should do. But the authorities would likely send them to one of those boarding schools, far from their families and everything they knew. He could try to find their families himself. But where would he look? The government had been moving native tribes all over the territory. Their families could be anywhere by now if they were still alive, or he could try to keep the children with him. This last option seemed impossible. He was a single white man with no legal right to native children. The government would never allow it. They might even arrest him for hiding the children. But as Stone Ridge listened to their quiet breathing in the next room, he realized that Impossible or not, this was what he wanted to do. The next morning brought visitors. Stone Ridge was outside chopping firewood when he saw 3 riders coming up the mountain trail. His heart started beating fast. He quickly went inside. "Stay quiet," he told the children. "Men coming." Skybird's eyes went wide with fear. She quickly gathered the younger children and led them to the back room. They had practiced this, staying hidden and silent. Stone Ridge opened his door when the men knocked. He recognized them as government agents from their uniforms and official badges. "Morning," said the leader, a thin man with cold eyes. "I'm Agent Miller. We're looking for some missing Indian children. 8 of them got separated from their families during the relocation last week." "Haven't seen any children," Stone Ridge said, trying to keep his voice steady. Agent Miller looked suspicious. "Mind if we search your place? Just to be thorough." Stone Ridge's mouth went dry. "This is my home. You got a warrant?" "Don't need one for Indian affairs," Miller said with a nasty smile. "These children are government property now. We have authority to search anywhere we think they might be hiding." Stone Ridge stepped back reluctantly. The 3 men pushed into his cabin, looking around carefully. In the back room, 8 children held their breath. Skybird had her arms around Running Wolf and Thundercloud, keeping them calm. The twins gripped each other's hands. Black Wolf was ready to fight if he had to, even though he was just a boy. The agents searched everywhere, under the bed, in the closets, even in the root cellar. But Stone Ridge had prepared well. The children were hidden in a space behind the back wall that he used for storing winter supplies. "Place smells funny," said one of the agents, sniffing the air. Stone Ridge's heart pounded. The cabin did smell different now, like 8 children living there for over a week, like the herbs Skybird used for cooking, like the sage the children burned during their evening ceremonies. "Been cooking different food lately," Stone Ridge said. "Got some new spices from town." The agents searched for 20 more minutes but found nothing. Finally, Agent Miller gave up. "If you see any Indian children, you report it immediately," he warned Stone Ridge. "There's a reward for information leading to their recovery." "How much?" Stone Ridge asked, trying to sound interested in the money. $50 each. Stone Ridge whistled as if impressed. $400 was more money than most people saw in a year. After the agents left, Stone Ridge waited a full hour before letting the children come out of hiding. They were cramped and scared, but safe. "They will come back," Skybird said, quietly. Stone Ridge nodded. "Probably." That evening, as the children sat around the fire, Stone Ridge made an announcement that surprised everyone, including himself. "I want you to stay here," he said. "All of you. For as long as you want." The children looked at each other with wonder and hope. But the government men, Black Wolf started. "I'll figure something out," Stone Ridge said. "I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way to make it legal." Skybird studied his face carefully. "Why? Why you want to keep us?" Stone Ridge looked around at their young faces. Faces that had become precious to him. How could he explain that they had saved him just as much as he had saved them? "Because," he said slowly, "you're my family now." Running Wolf, who didn't understand all the English words, knew something important was happening. He got up and hugged Stone Ridge around the waist. "Family," the little boy repeated in his sweet voice. That night, Stone Ridge began making plans. If he was going to keep these children safe, he needed to understand the law. He needed to find out exactly what rights he might have. More importantly, he needed to find out what had happened to their families. The children deserved to know if their parents were alive and safe. And if their families were looking for them, Stone Ridge would help reunite them, even if it broke his heart. But he was also determined that these children would not be sent to a government boarding school. Not while he had breath in his body. The next few days were tense. Stone Ridge made a trip to town, leaving the children hidden in the cabin. He went to the courthouse and the land office, asking careful questions about adoption laws and custody rights. What he learned wasn't encouraging. As a single man, his chances of legally adopting 8 native children were almost zero. The government preferred to place native children in boarding schools where they could be properly educated. But Stone Ridge also learned something interesting. If he could prove that the children's families had died or abandoned them, and if he could show that he was providing proper care, he might have a chance. It was a small chance, but it was something. When he returned to the cabin, he found the children anxiously waiting for news. "I have an idea," he told them. "But it's risky and it will take time." Skybird translated for the younger children. Then she looked back at Stone Ridge. "We trust you," she said simply. Stone Ridge felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders. 8 young lives were depending on him. 8 children who had already lost so much were putting their faith in a lonely rancher who was making up his plans as he went along. But as he looked at their hopeful faces around his fireplace, Stone Ridge knew he would do whatever it took to keep them safe, even if it meant fighting the whole government to do it. Spring came early to the Dakota mountains that year. The snow melted fast, filling the streams with rushing water and covering the meadows with wildflowers. Stone Ridge had never been so grateful for winter to end. The children had been with him for 2 months now, and everything had changed. His small cabin had grown. With help from Night Horse and Black Wolf, Stone Ridge had built 2 new rooms, one for the girls and one for the boys. The children slept on simple beds made from pine lumber and cornhusk mattresses, but they were warm and dry and safe. More importantly, Stone Ridge had found a lawyer willing to help him. His name was William Two Hawks, and he was half Lakota, half white. He understood both worlds and had been fighting for native rights for years. When Stone Ridge rode into town and explained his situation, Two Hawks listened carefully. "What you're trying to do is nearly impossible," the lawyer had said. But nearly impossible isn't the same as completely impossible. Two Hawks explained that Stone Ridge would need to prove several things: that the children's families couldn't be found, that he could provide proper care and education, and that keeping the children with him was in their best interests. "The government won't make it easy," Two Hawks warned. "They have plans for native children, and those plans don't include letting white ranchers adopt them." But there was hope. Some judges were beginning to question the boarding school system. Reports were coming out about poor conditions and harsh treatment. If they could find the right judge at the right time, they might have a chance. The first step was trying to locate the children's families. This was the hardest part for Stone Ridge. He wanted to keep the children, but he knew it was wrong to let their families think they were dead. Two Hawks hired investigators to search for any relatives who might have survived the forced relocation. The news, when it came, was mixed. Morning Star and Evening Star's parents had died of sickness during the harsh winter journey. They had no other close relatives. Skybird and Night Horse's parents were alive but had been sent to a reservation hundreds of miles away. Thundercloud's father had died, but his mother was living with relatives on a different reservation. The hardest news was about Running Wolf. His entire family, parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, had all died from disease and cold during the relocation. At 6 years old, he was completely alone in the world except for the makeshift family that had formed in Stone Ridge's cabin. When Skybird translated this news for the younger children, there were many tears. But there was also relief. At least, now they knew what had happened to their families. The not knowing had been almost worse than the truth. Stone Ridge sat with each child and talked about their choices. Through Skybird's translation, he explained that some of them had families who were alive and probably wondering what had happened to them. "Anyone who wants to find their family, I'll help you," he promised. "Even if it means you have to leave here." Skybird looked at him with wise eyes that seemed too old for her 14-year-old face. "What if we want to stay?" she asked. "Then I'll fight to keep you," Stone Ridge said. "But you need to understand, it might not work. The government might take you away anyway." The children talked among themselves for days, switching between English and Lakota as they discussed their futures. Stone Ridge tried not to listen, but he couldn't help hoping they would choose to stay. Their decision, when it came, surprised him. Skybird spoke for all of them. "We want to try to visit families who are alive, but we want to come back here. This is home now." Stone Ridge felt his heart swell with happiness and break with worry at the same time. These children wanted to stay with him, but the road ahead was full of dangers. Two Hawks began the legal process of applying for custody. It was complicated and expensive, requiring lots of paperwork and court appearances. Stone Ridge had to prove he could support 8 children financially. He had to show that he could provide proper education. The education part was actually going well. Skybird was teaching the other children to read and write English while Stone Ridge taught them arithmetic and basic science. In return, the children taught him about their culture, their language, and their traditional knowledge about plants and animals. The cabin had become a place where 2 different worlds met and mixed. Stone Ridge learned to cook traditional native foods while the children learned to milk cows and tend chickens. They all worked together to plant a large garden with both white people's vegetables and traditional native plants. In the evenings, they still gathered around the fire. Sometimes Stone Ridge would read to them from books. Sometimes the children would tell traditional stories or sing their beautiful songs. More and more often, they would just talk, sharing stories about their day, their dreams, their fears. Stone Ridge had never been happier. The lonely, bitter man who had hidden in this mountain cabin was gone. In his place was someone who woke up each morning excited to see what the children would teach him that day. But happiness didn't make their situation less dangerous. Agent Miller returned twice more, always looking suspicious, always asking questions. Stone Ridge had to be very careful. The children had to stay hidden whenever strangers came around. The hiding was hardest on the children. They were used to living freely, running and playing outside. Being cooped up in the cabin whenever visitors came made them feel like prisoners. "I hate this," Black Wolf said one day after spending 3 hours hiding in the back room while a cattle buyer visited the ranch. "I want to fight." "Fighting won't help," Stone Ridge told him gently. "We have to be smart, not brave." But Stone Ridge understood the boy's frustration. It wasn't fair that these children had to hide just for existing. As spring turned to summer, Two Hawks brought encouraging news. He had found a judge who might be sympathetic to their case. Judge Harrison had recently ruled against a boarding school in a different case, saying that separating children from loving families was harmful. "He's agreed to hear our petition," Two Hawks explained. "But we need to be prepared. The government will send their best lawyers to fight us." Stone Ridge began preparing for the legal battle of his life. He gathered evidence of how well the children were doing in his care. Skybird's reading had improved dramatically. Thundercloud had grown taller and stronger. All the children were healthy and happy. He also documented their educational progress and their contributions to the ranch. Nighthorse had become an expert at caring for the horses. The twins had developed a system for organizing the chicken coop that produced more eggs than ever before. Even little Running Wolf had learned to help with simple chores. But the most important evidence was how the children felt about their situation. When Two Hawks interviewed each child separately, their answers were clear. They wanted to stay with Stone Ridge. They felt safe and loved in his home. They were learning and growing in ways that would help them in life. "He's not trying to make us forget who we are," Skybird told the lawyer. "He helps us remember while also teaching us new things." This was true. Stone Ridge had encouraged the children to maintain their cultural practices. They still spoke Lakota together, still told their traditional stories, still practiced the ceremonies they remembered from their families. But they were also learning skills that would help them survive in the changing world: reading, writing, arithmetic, and trades like farming and animal care. As the court date approached, Stone Ridge became more nervous. Everything depended on convincing one judge that 8 native children were better off with a white rancher than in a government boarding school. 3 days before the hearing, disaster struck. Agent Miller arrived with a full squad of government agents and local law enforcement. They had a warrant to search the property and take custody of any native children found there. Stone Ridge saw them coming from far down the mountain trail. He had maybe 10 minutes to act. "Hide," he told the children urgently. "All of you, in the cave." Behind his cabin, hidden by thick pine trees, was a small cave that Stone Ridge had discovered years earlier. He had prepared it as an emergency hiding place, stocking it with blankets, food, and water. The children disappeared into the trees just as the agents reached the cabin door. This time, the search was thorough and mean. The agents tore apart Stone Ridge's home, breaking furniture and dumping out drawers. They searched every inch of the cabin and the surrounding buildings. "We know they're here," Agent Miller snarled. "Someone saw smoke from cooking fires. Too much smoke for one man." "I've been burning green wood," Stone Ridge lied. "Makes more smoke." The agents searched for hours but found nothing. The cave was too well hidden and the children were too disciplined to make any noise. Finally, frustrated and angry, the agents left. But Miller's parting words were chilling. "We'll be watching you. One slip, one mistake, and we'll have you arrested for hiding government property." That night, as the children crept back to the cabin, Stone Ridge realized their time was running out. The court hearing was in 3 days, but they might not make it that long. "We have to take the biggest risk of all," he told Two Hawks the next morning. "We have to bring the children to court and let the judge see them for himself." It was dangerous. If they lost the case, the agents would immediately take the children away. There would be no more hiding, no more chances. The courthouse in Cedar Falls was packed with people on the morning of July 15th, 1887. Word had spread about the unusual case, a white rancher trying to adopt 8 native children. Some people came to support Stone Ridge and the children. Others came hoping to see the government put an end to what they called Indian sympathizing. Stone Ridge sat at the front table with his lawyer, William Two Hawks. Behind them in the first row sat the 8 children. They wore their best clothes, simple but clean dresses for the girls and shirts and pants for the boys. Skybird had braided the younger girl's hair with ribbons Stone Ridge had bought in town. The children were nervous but determined. They had practiced what they would say if the judge asked them questions. Skybird would translate for the ones whose English wasn't strong enough yet. Across the courtroom sat Agent Miller and 2 government lawyers. They had thick files of papers and looked very confident. Miller kept glaring at the children like they were criminals who had escaped from jail. Judge Harrison was an older man with kind eyes and gray hair. He had a reputation for being fair, but also for following the law exactly as it was written. Stone Ridge wasn't sure if that would help them or hurt them. "This is an unusual case," the judge said as he called the hearing to order. "I want to hear from both sides, and then I'll make my decision based on what's best for these children." The government lawyers went first. They argued that native children belonged in boarding schools where they could receive proper education and learn to become productive members of civilized society. They said Stone Ridge had no legal right to keep the children, and that what he was doing was actually kidnapping. "These children are wards of the government," the lead prosecutor said. "Mr. Stone Ridge has no authority to interfere with official policy regarding their care and education." Agent Miller testified about how the children had been unlawfully hidden from authorities. He made it sound like Stone Ridge was a criminal who had stolen government property. When it was Two Hawks' turn, he stood up slowly and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "this case isn't about government policy or legal technicalities. It's about 8 children who found a loving home when they were dying in a blizzard, and a man who opened his heart and his door to save their lives." Two Hawks called Stone Ridge as his first witness. Stone Ridge had never been comfortable speaking in public, but he told his story honestly. He explained how the children had appeared at his door, half frozen and desperate. He described how they had become a family over the long winter months. "I didn't plan this," Stone Ridge said, "but these children needed help and I had help to give. Now we need each other." The government lawyer cross-examined Stone Ridge harshly, trying to make him seem like a lawbreaker who was interfering with government business. But Stone Ridge stayed calm and kept bringing the conversation back to the children's welfare. "Ducks, you think you know better than the United States government how to educate native children?" the prosecutor asked sarcastically. "I think I know these 8 children," Stone Ridge replied. "I know what makes them happy, what scares them, what they're good at, and what they need to learn. I don't think a big institution hundreds of miles away can say the same thing." Next, Two Hawks called several character witnesses. The local doctor testified that the children were healthy and well cared for. The school teacher from town said that Skybird's reading and writing skills were excellent for her age. A neighboring rancher testified that Stone Ridge was an honest, hard-working man who would make a good father. But the most powerful testimony came from the children themselves. Skybird spoke first. She stood up straight and looked directly at the judge as she spoke in clear, careful English. "Your Honor, before we came to Stone Ridge's house, I thought we were going to die in the snow. He saved our lives. But he did more than that. He made us feel like we were worth saving." She paused, gathering her courage for what she wanted to say next. "In our families, we learned that children belong with people who love them and take care of them. Stone Ridge loves us. He doesn't try to make us forget who we are. He helps us remember our families while also teaching us new things. He is a good father." The judge listened carefully as Skybird spoke. When she finished, he asked, "What would happen if you were sent to a boarding school instead?" Skybird's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed strong. "They would cut our hair and forbid us to speak Lakota. They would punish us for singing our songs or telling our stories. They would try to kill the part of us that remembers our families. That's not education. That's cruelty." One by one, the other children spoke. Nighthorse talked about how Stone Ridge had taught him to care for horses and read books. Thundercloud, now 9 and much healthier, told the judge about how Stone Ridge had stayed awake all night to take care of him when he was sick. The twins, now 10, spoke together, finishing each other's sentences as they described their daily life on the ranch. Black Wolf, who was now 12, talked about the skills he was learning and how he hoped to have his own ranch someday. Gentle Rain, 11, spoke quietly but clearly about how safe she felt in Stone Ridge's home. "He never shouts or hits. He listens when we talk. He cares about our feelings." When it was Running Wolf's turn, the 7-year-old walked up to the judge's bench without fear. In his sweet high voice, he said the words he had practiced. "Stone Ridge is my papa now. I love him." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Tatu. Government lawyers tried to argue that the children were too young to make such important decisions. They brought up laws about Native children being government wards. They talked about the benefits of formal education and the importance of following official policy. But their arguments sounded cold and heartless after hearing from the children themselves. Judge Harrison called for a recess to consider his decision. Stone Ridge and the children waited in a small room next to the courtroom. Nobody talked much. They all knew their entire future would be decided in the next hour. Running Wolf climbed onto Stone Ridge's lap and fell asleep. The other children sat close together, holding hands and whispering prayers in Lakota. When they were called back into the courtroom, Judge Harrison looked serious. Stone Ridge's heart was beating so loud he was sure everyone could hear it. "This has been one of the most difficult decisions of my career," the judge began. "On one hand, we have established government policy regarding the education and care of Native children. On the other hand, we have 8 young people who have clearly thrived in an unconventional but loving home." Stone Ridge held his breath. "After careful consideration," Judge Harrison continued, "I find that the best interests of these children are served by remaining in the custody of Mr. Stone Ridge. The evidence shows that they are receiving excellent care, appropriate education, and the love and stability they need to grow into healthy, productive adults." The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others booed. Agent Miller jumped up to object, but the judge held up his hand for silence. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison said, "I am ordering that Mr. Stone Ridge be granted legal guardianship of all 8 children, with full parental rights and responsibilities. The government is hereby prohibited from removing these children from his care without just cause and due process." Stone Ridge felt like he might faint from relief and joy. The children were crying and hugging each other. Skybird ran to Stone Ridge and threw her arms around him. "We won," she whispered. "We're really your children now." Agent Miller and the government lawyers were furious, but there was nothing they could do. The judge's decision was final. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Most people were celebrating, but a few were angry about the decision. 2 hawks quickly got Stone Ridge and the children into his wagon and drove them away from the noise and commotion. That evening, back at their mountain home, the family celebrated with a special dinner. Stone Ridge had bought cake and candy in town, treats the children had never tasted before. As they sat around their table, a real family now, legally and officially, Stone Ridge thought about how much had changed since that snowy night 8 months ago. But their challenges weren't over. 2 years later, some of their relatives finally found them. Thundercloud's mother, who had survived the harsh relocation, came looking for her son. The reunion was bittersweet. She had remarried and had new children, but she wanted Thundercloud. First year. After long discussions with Stone Ridge and Two Hawks, they worked out an arrangement. Thundercloud would spend summers with his mother's new family, and the school year with Stone Ridge, getting the education his mother wanted for him. Skybird and Nighthorse's parents also made contact. They were living on a reservation far away, struggling to survive. When they learned their children were safe and getting an education, they agreed to let them stay with Stone Ridge but visit each summer. Some relatives of the other children were found as well. In each case, Stone Ridge helped arrange meetings and visits. He never tried to keep the children from their blood families, even when it was painful to let them go. But the core family remained together. Running Wolf, who had no living relatives, stayed permanently. So did the twins, whose parents had died. Black Wolf chose to stay as well, even though he had distant cousins on a